everyone. I hope you and all of your loved ones are well in these challenging times. This, I guess, is a tale of a global sports media company that is actually a very small media company. There's less than 50 people end to end. And this is really the story of the impact of technology on our business over the last 6 years and our evolution over that period as well. So let's begin the story. I was just starting off by saying that ultimately we're a global sports media company that's actually a very small company. There's less than 50 people end to end. And this is the story really of the impact of technology on our business and our evolution really over the last, 6 years. So 6 years ago, I joined ATP Media. I was employee number 20 and the first real technical employee of ATP Media. Up till then, working as a very traditional media company, it lent very heavily on its suppliers. And when I arrived at the business, it was very much like most relatively small businesses in a small building on a high street in Surrey, outside of London, and a business that was based primarily around, Microsoft Exchange, running on a server in a rack, with shared folders for shared documents. Everybody who traveled the world would VPN in onto the file server and access the internet via that VPN from all over the world. All the media storage seemed to be on portable hard drives. And to cap it all, the building was 140 meters from the River Thames itself. So I guess there were some vulnerabilities, from what I saw there, but also on top of that, the media business itself was very traditional too in how it distributed its content. It was very much a single world feed that it would produce on site that would be distributed via satellite to everyone around the world. Now, for us though, there was a bigger challenge than that, a capacity challenge, because ultimately as a global moving event, just like you sort of understand from the Dorner example that Lakshmi was talking about before, we sort of hit a different scale to that because we effectively have sort of 10 races happening all at once. There's up to 10 courts with match play happening at the same time for 5 matches a day on each of those 10 courts, and each match could last over 3 hours. And the tournament itself lasts anywhere between 7 and 14 days. And you add that up to nearly 60 events per year, with some of those events being concurrent and some of those events happening on back-to-back, so literally following straight after each other. So there's a challenge there really for us as a business, because we were kind of leaving a lot of value on the table. So in 2016, we invested in a hybrid satellite and global fiber network that connected 23 of the main tennis event sites worldwide, and gave us the sort of beginning of a platform for us to do our main form of distribution. However, we had limitations on this because the fiber that we deployed at that time was relatively new in the way it worked, and ultimately the available capacity that was commercially viable was relatively small. And so we were literally at a maximum running at about 450 meg capacity on, in some cases, single and protected circuits. So we had to cut our cloth accordingly. And I guess we were able to then just deliver a certain amount of what we were able to do. So that was a big increase in the number of courts that we could deliver. We were able to send what we call additional feeds, which would be ISOs of beauty shots or press conferences, and also start to provide what we call unilateral services. So services into the broadcasters that they could use by having their own talent on site and feeding live pictures back to their studio, where they could link to between different matches that were going on and provide their own coverage. We're also available to do live flash interviews directly of players coming off of court, and start to do the very first of the world feed remote production from site. So these were the very, very early days of us being able to do editing and live production remotely from London, from all of the sites around the world, be it Rio de Janeiro, be it Beijing, be it Acapulco, various places that were quite challenging places to connect to. But ultimately, this increase in the number of matches we produced effectively was an 83% increase in productivity, if you like, that suddenly we were able to achieve by moving across into fibre. And if you work that out as a cost per hour, then some quite interesting maths came out of it, because overall we were able then to produce each of those matches with an overall decrease in cost of 30%. So in effect, our productivity had gone up, but our cost base in terms of distribution of the matches had reduced by a third. This was very encouraging for us. And I guess, yeah, great so far. However, the sports media world doesn't really stop changing, and we're seeing a lot of fragmentation in the way the rights models work across the globe. The licensees in particular are varying their sophistication and subsequent demand, and we sort of split the different broadcasters that we have around the world into two tiers. The sort of tier 1 and tier 2 ones are the more sophisticated broadcasters around the world who have a lot of on-site services. They would demand the live two-way interviews and have a very high quality requirement, and can basically take all the matches that we can give to them, because they may have multiple sports channels in order to be able to demonstrate that they are the place to come and watch tennis. The tier 3 and tier 4 ones are much simpler in their approach, and they would travel a lot less and rely a lot more on our content, the non-live content that we would put up, plus feed themselves really either through their own digital platforms. But the outside courts and the courts we are able to now distribute were much more interesting to them, because that's where their player of interest might be from their territory. So we had to sort of find a way to try and achieve something that would really enable everything for everybody. And the message we were getting from those, whether they were the tier 1s and 2s who needed more in terms of quality, to the tier 3s and 4s who needed to access more of the matches that really meant a lot to them, which were the much more peripheral matches, if you like, that told different stories depending on which player you were following. So after 4 years of successful delivery using our fiber network and leaning on a hybrid version with our satellite, we decided it was time to move and design a brand new network. So what did that network look like? Well, the business justification for it was really that we needed to increase the capacity on our network and change the scale at which we were able to work, and also to add in various other things. We were already doing some remote production on the 500s, but could we start to do the remote production on our bigger tournaments at the Masters 1000 series? We would move into the land of HDR and heading towards the UHD world, and roll in a ton more dedicated data services, whether those are data services carrying match data or data in terms of file transfers and on-site archiving, and then leading ourselves as well into higher capacity distribution for virtual advertising, and leading us as well into services that directly connect us into the cloud and what the potential opportunities that could emerge from that. So then this happened, and I guess we were actually in quite a good place. I mean, if you think about it, really, sports media and what we do in live, by necessity, we have to be agile. We sort of have this phrase that, agility through necessity is something that we absolutely lean on. And I'd already, for instance, moved the business to Office 365 and SharePoint. We were very early adopters of Teams, and our entire production was based on the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite. So as far as our digital workplace was concerned, we had a seamless transition into that sort of work from home, because in effect, we were already having to work from airport lounges, from hotel rooms, from porter cabins, from our homes, from our base, which was in Esher in Surrey. So those elements were already pretty covered, and the workforce as a whole moved very seamlessly across into it. Also, I'd already moved and created our content management services into private virtualized managed services in data centers in the UK. And that was then accessed by broadcasters around the world. So our non-live content access and facilitation and transcoding and delivery to YouTube and all of the big main social media platforms and our tennis TV was all being done from cloud-based systems anyway, that we were managing remotely and delivering to remotely as well. So our next phase really was to deploy a new network that could take us that next step forward. So this was going to be the core network. We were going to increase the core network capacity and change some of the connectivity approaches that we would do into the local events. So being much smarter and cleverer about how we deploy the local tail circuits and use our lessons learned before, because ultimately those could be one of the most vulnerable parts of our network in general. So trying to shorten the route to the nearest data center or point of presence to enable access onto the main core network, and then start to deliver across that network to all of our, not only the main broadcasters who we'd had on before, but to important places, an increased number of points of presence and data centers globally. Also at the bottom there was the important extra step of that connection into public cloud, because we felt that there were real future innovations that we could harness as a result of that. So that gave us a burstable, high capacity, dedicated global network that connected data centers everywhere around the world. We then moved in terms of our video technology to IP. And this is where we really start to transform ourselves, and video as a whole has traditionally clung on to very old-fashioned ways of transport of video, and the move to IP meant that packetization, if you like, of the video signal gave us great new ways that we could actually start to make some significant changes, because that enabled us really to start to decentralize what we were doing. So rather than have a setup, either on site or like we'd been doing on the 500s for nearly 5 years by then, remote production from all around the world, we were still effectively focused on one place to do it, whether the hub in London was that one place or being on site was that one place. We were still in a centralized world of video production, and I felt we really needed to increase our capability by starting to really decentralize that. So this was a network that is going to lead us into what I've been campaigning a lot for, which is the next stage of our move into what we tend to call as, live virtualized production. So live virtualized production means basically all of the kit that we had on site, we would have already made the transition to move it into a world of remote production. So it's still very much hardware-based systems, but the ultimate goal for us was to effectively take what was effectively those hardware-based systems, move them into the cloud, into virtualized processing environments, and then give us the opportunity that people could simply produce content from wherever they were, right? Wherever they are in the world. It didn't really matter. Those people could be on site, they could be in a hub, they could be at the individual places, which even could be their homes if necessary. But basically allowing the people to go where they need to be. Because if you think about what we do in the remote productions that we were working on around the world, if we're doing our production in London, then we're asking creative people to work at the best of their capability and creativity in time zones that were completely the opposite in terms of the clock. So when the event is happening in Acapulco, in Beijing, or in Australia, these are people who are working overnight. Now, if it's just one race or one football match that you're working on for an antisocial period of time, that's fine. But if you've got to consider that what we do in tennis, we're on air for 16 hours a day for up to 7 or 14 days in a row. And when you're asking people to work for those long periods when your body clock is completely at odds with the environment and that you're working in, then ultimately creativity can possibly, really start to suffer. And our product is something that we're very keen to protect in terms of that productivity. So allowing people to potentially move around to where they need to be, either for latency or for productivity and creativity reasons, is one of the real big goals of this. So the move after that is to effectively create this sort of technology stack. And the technology stack is the one that really I've been campaigning for with a lot of organizations, particularly the hardware manufacturers in the broadcast media industry, to start to move them across into a world where they would be producing SaaS-based products, ultimately licensable, flexible environments, applications that would run on the stacks that we could use. So whether that's a managed service provider who owns the whole stack for us, or it is different suppliers that we would be working with for different levels of the stack itself. Ultimately, this is quite a transition for our whole industry, and a lot of the work that I've been doing is to campaign to get the entire value chain to effectively sort of pivot all of our businesses over the next sort of, at the time, sort of 3 to 5 years effectively, so that nobody ends up losing out in terms of what we're trying to achieve here, but people can move their businesses accordingly to really capitalize on the benefits of what we could achieve. So the big push really post-COVID has been obviously moving to live production. That train has massively accelerated towards the station in my world. Back when we originally conceived the second generation of our network, prior to COVID, we were on a sort of a good 5-year trajectory for some of this technology to arrive and some real opportunities for adoption. That's massively increased now, closer to us into sort of literally the next 2 to 3 years, where ultimately for us that means our content can traverse from site over the fiber network that we have and stay up in the cloud whilst it's being produced. No longer do we need to bring it down into terra firma. And the important thing about that, gives a real opportunity for our broadcasters, really, because as they start to shift into the cloud too, then ultimately that transition from us into them as a B2B organization becomes much more seamless, but infinitely more powerful and adaptable. So as the broadcasters move and become that also cloud-based, the internal egress opportunities for them make things look very interesting indeed. So part of this as well for the less sophisticated broadcasters around the world is the opportunities that then those broadcasters can now start to access, a choice effectively in the distribution, because they may be less sophisticated. They may have not had the opportunity to invest fully in full fat fiber, as we might call it. But we could actually be now distributing our content up in that cloud environment and give the opportunity that our broadcasters can now start to pick and choose, that sort of pick your own distribution. The important thing for them is on whatever level of bandwidth or connectivity they may have into their systems and services, they can simply choose the ones that are most meaningful and relevant to them on an hourly basis, effectively, as a tennis day continues and as the tournament itself carries on, which reduces the bandwidth requirement on their side, but gives them much greater opportunity to make sure that the stories they're trying to tell and the players they're trying to follow do actually make it to air in that country. So this becomes a very flexible environment for us that, we can quickly deploy these services. And also importantly for us, it gives us the business analysis, if you like. Our capability becomes much greater then to have global monitoring of the activity of our clients in this environment and in these connected nodes. And that deeper understanding is really, really important, so that we can see and understand how our content is being used and deliver better and improved products in the future to all levels and tiers of broadcasters. So those other things that we can generate having done this is that we can now start to then look at a much easier way of applying localization features. So these could be on-the-fly standards conversions for broadcasters who are in different territories where different video standards are required for their broadcast. Also, the application of localized graphics in localized languages for them, rendered on the fly in the data center that is in that region that is going to be servicing them at that particular broadcaster. Also, the opportunity for us in the future as we can deploy localized virtualized advertising. So the replacement of logos in and around the stadium and court that now could be sold in a regional basis and much more easily deployed, because the distribution, the global distribution, doesn't need to be multiplied up to the same level as it would be if we had to try and generate all of that stuff where the actual content is originated from in the first place. All of this then created in the cloud and maximized using the fact that our signals simply don't return back to Earth. So did we win? I mean, do we win by doing this? And I guess as a business, what we're looking at is to try and understand and realistically, I guess, measure the success. And what I did, I created a little sort of crib sheet that we use internally in the business. And this crib sheet helps us all understand as a checklist what we've achieved and how we can ultimately measure success. And that success going forwards for us, yes, it includes the fact that, of course, we will need to maintain the quality of our output at a cost-effective level, but more importantly, increase the levels of collaboration, whether we're doing that locally on site or by doing it effectively remotely from somewhere else around the world. That capability is super important to us, that we're able to super serve the broadcasters and all of our stakeholders, because remember, it's the tournaments as well, plus the ATP and the tour themselves and the players, and giving us that resilience and redundancy in the face of pandemics like COVID, not only for the technology here, but I'm talking about for the people too, so that very quickly we can either spin up services somewhere else or allow other people to dial in and take over and maintain consistency. Because remember, in live TV for sports, you know, we can never have a black frame. The other big thing for us in tennis, if you imagine, we start off with 10 courts at the beginning of the tournament, and by the end of the finals day in 2 weeks' time or 7 days' time, we're down to 1 court. So the capability for us to scale up and scale down according to our needs, even during that tournament, is really important to us. The speed of deployment and how we work is obviously critical, because we have back-to-back tournaments as well. And I think overall, the consistency of that service is going to be super important. And the added benefits to this, by us reducing the amount of hardware that we have on site and reducing potentially the amount of travel that we do as well, we will always ultimately be reducing our overall carbon footprint too. The other beauty of this for me as a technologist and an innovator is that systems and services like this can easily give me opportunities to sandbox, to test new ideas and technologies and innovations so that I can continue to push the envelope. So I guess there are other advantages that ultimately follow on from this. And this is where things start to get really interesting for me. You know, we then start to move to APIs for things like the custom delivery of non-live content. So rather than it being a sort of world where people are being pushed content to in a non-live world, anyone can then start to pull that non-live content, customize it again for their own purposes. The opportunity globally, if we think about it in terms of cloud-based environments, is that the takers themselves are now starting to share the costs on their side for processing, because if they want to apply levels of processing to give them the extra creativity they need, then that's fine. That's at their cost, and they just need to apply to do that. And then it gives us the opportunity to really start to leverage the maturity of the machine learning and AI world that we have for not only metadata creation, but really advanced tools for creating automated highlights and servicing, you know, social media and that wider area of the digital landscape. Overall from this though, I guess the final thing would be, we would really then start to embrace the power of blockchain. And that's super important for me, that as we've now packetized all of our video, we're now in an opportunity where, in effect, every packet can kind of call home. We can actually start to put real access and rights governance over every single packet that moves around all of these networks, governed by that blockchain, that immutable contract that rights holders have, that give us the opportunity to make sure that the right people are allowed to get the right stuff and the people who are not allowed to simply don't. The control and the capability that blockchain gives us is something that we should not ignore, but I guess that's a bigger conversation that maybe I should leave to another time. So thank you very much, and I hope that was of interest.